So thank you again, Carlene. Thank you, Tuba. Thank you, Steven Spielberg. All the participants in these videos that we've been making for the original purpose was social work with victims of abuse and family counseling course. But we're also realizing that these might be of interest to participants with the Women's Center, volunteers for the Women's Center. Other audiences might find some of these summaries of our witnessing and experiences useful. So today might be a little tiny bit different than some of the other ones in that I'm just going to talk about me. I'm going to talk about class. I'm going to talk about class issues. And class is a little bit of almost an old-fashioned idea now. People are, oh, class. It's like feminism. Oh, feminism. We're all equal now. All the women are equal now, and a woman can be anything she wants. And if she's having trouble, either she's a sissy or she isn't just stepping up. All you got to do as a woman these days
she's just not assertive enough. But if she's assertive, then technically she's a bitch.
Right. A woman. So some people have the idea that class doesn't matter anymore. We're all equal. We all have equal opportunities. Gender doesn't matter anymore.
I don't see color.
Yeah, I don't see color. Race doesn't matter anymore. Well, I'm going to tell you, in my experience, my witnessing, what I've been reading, thinking about, what students share back with me, after 23 years of teaching in social work and being an activist at Take Back the Night, International Women's Day, December 6th ceremonies, Aboriginal days, all of these different events, and all of these different voices, class continues to matter, as does gender, as does race, and so on. But where it gets a little bit complicated to talk about is where are the edges of each of those influences in our own lives.
We know that they intersect. It's just trying to define and narrow down and articulate that exact point.
Precisely. Because and why is that of consequence, why is that of significance, is if you can see where the problem moments are, you're more empowered to engage with them in a useful way. If you look around and you say, well, my entire life sucks. Well, where do you even start, right? Does it suck to this extent because of gender, this extent because of class, this extent because of rural geography, or just bad luck, right? Sometimes you have someone who's an asshole in front of you all the time. Are they being an asshole because of your gender or because of your race?
Or because you're just genuinely a crappy person.
Right, or they are, or they are, right? So this is the challenge as social workers with victims of abuse, as social workers with family issues. So what I'm going to do for the purposes of class is I'm going to tell my own story. And through the telling of that story, I hope it will be useful to other people who want to grip the issue of class. So class, to me, is about being born into a family where you don't. One of the things that goes with class is often working class, poor class, lumpen proletariat in a old-fashioned Marxist kind of labeling, lumpen proletariat, so even more marginalized than working class, the edge of that. And lumpen proletariat kind of means the thieves and the murderers and the brothel workers and the drug dealers. You have your working class, your marginalized workers, the people in the factory, and then the people who are on the outskirts even of that. And that's where I feel I was born, on the outskirts of that lumpen proletariat, kind of destined to be a stripper, a hooker, maybe a housewife, maybe all of the above through my life cycle. I had been socialized to not have big dreams for myself. And that's, I think, one of the great violences, deprivations, poverty of being born into a poor class. You don't dream big for yourself. You think, oh, maybe I'll get a job as a waitress when I grow up. You don't dream, oh, I could be a lawyer, I could go to college, I could go to university. I hardly knew anyone who had finished high school. My family didn't have finished high school education. And that right there sets you into a space of limitations and smallness. So class in a classical, old-fashioned Marxist, simplistic way is often thought of either you are lumpen proletariat, so one of the hoodlum crowd, you are a worker in a factory, you're petit bourgeois, which means like you small owners of companies, capitalists who own big companies. And I think the craftspeople was one of the other categories. For my purposes, that's why I'm staying out of that complex language, because I don't want to make it kind of dreary and obscure to people. I want to tell a story about class and link my own life story. And I would suggest to you that many of your clients in social work with victims of abuse or family counseling come from this space of perhaps wishing to be working class, but not even that fancy. Okay? So, I'll tell you how some of my own consciousness came, how I rose myself up through some of those struggles, and what I've witnessed in others. So one, I remember being in maybe grade 7, grade 8, where you're coloring the maps of the world, and I remember thinking, I'm never going to go anywhere. Why would I care about where India is? I'll never go there. What's that to me? So I didn't even have an imagination that the whole world belongs to me. If we take the contrast, many families are raising their kids to, oh, you'll be on even when they're little kids, they go on a plane to India, or they go to Russia, or they go somewhere. It never really occurred to me until I was about 20 that I could be on a plane. Preceding that, I hadn't thought, oh, I'll go on a plane and I'll go here, I could go there, I could go anywhere. Perhaps, too, back then, planes were more expensive than they are now, but the idea that I could travel the world, or the world is my oyster, or I could go anywhere, be anything, that never occurred to me, right? So I dropped out of school, I had finished grade 8, and I ended up waitressing in places like Tim Hortons, Country Style Donuts, those kind of service sector jobs, minimum wage, part-time, no benefits. And at some point I started thinking to myself, well, I could go back to school and finish the equivalent of my high school. I went to adult upgrading and finished that. And that started to open up some possibilities. And then around that time I started hanging out with the women's movement, which is where I started to learn more about what it meant for me to be of working class heritage. So I'm going to give you 3 creative writing texts that could give you something. If you don't know where I'm coming from, you could read these books and it might give you some insight. George Orwell's Animal Farm is a classic one about oppression and revolution and rising up, and how revolutions can go sideways. It's a tragic fable telling what happens when the animals drive out Mr. Jones and attempt to run their farm themselves, and it's since become kind of famous. George Orwell is very famous. So I remember reading this and thinking, yeah, the world could be different, but what would that different be? What would it look like? Who do I trust to kind of lead me into a different world? Now, this book from Upton Sinclair is another novel. In some of the most harrowing scenes ever written in modern literature, Upton Sinclair vividly depicts factory life in Chicago in the first years of the 20th century. The horrors of the slaughterhouses, the barbarous working conditions, the crushing poverty, the disease, the depravity, the despair. This is told through a young immigrant family and what happens to them. And I felt this family. They were kind of being preyed upon by landlords would lie to them, the factory boss lied to them. All these situations were set up explicitly to take advantage of this family who had good hardworking ethics and wished to build a better life for themselves, but they kept getting sideswiped. Injury, sickness, trouble, unwanted pregnancies, and all this kind of stuff. I felt this book. Now this book, Thomas Hardy and Jude the Obscure, the main male character in here a young country workman obsessed by the ambition to become a student. The novel recounts the painful process of his disillusionment and his final destruction at the hands of an oppressive society which refuses to acknowledge his desires. So although the main character is a male, I felt that male character who wanted to go to school and build a better life. So these three books right here somehow together were some of my primers of how I wish to have a different, better life. Then some of these kind of books where I came to realize, wow, there's books about waitresses. There's books about cocktail waitresses, cleaning ladies. There's books written about women's work, about women who do sewing and all these things that are kind of invisible, insignificant labors of women. When you're doing the dishes, somebody writes books about this. And I started to think about, wow, this is work. This is work. And then I got my hands on feminist economists writing, talking about, whoa, reflect on this. Now here's a really core, life-changing, game-changer kind of set of ideas that I'm going to throw into the room here. They're totally obvious, but in other ways, they're completely obscured. What counts in our world?
What men do.
What men do. Well said. There's the summary. What counts? So you might have, imagine this story. You have a man and a woman, and of course Marilyn Waring in her book, What Counts, actually, is an economist, and she's written about this. But I'm giving you some of the summary for me. So you have a man and a woman wake up on the same day, they're the same age, they're the same everything, except one's male, one's female. He might go drive his truck all day. He gets paid for driving the truck. The paycheck he gets is registered through his social insurance number. It comes to exist in the government's eyes because he's paid provincial tax, he's paid federal tax on that, he pays unemployment insurance, he pays Canada Pension Plan from that one paycheck. So the truck driver at the end of the week, he gets this pay stub. He exists. He counts. His work matters. He is seen by the government. The woman in his life, the woman he's married, who's identical to him, she gets up in the morning, she makes him breakfast, she makes the kids breakfast, she does the dishes, she does laundry, she feeds the dog, she feeds the cat, she waters the garden outside, maybe she plants some chives or some lettuce or chard, she comes in the house, the laundry, folds the laundry now, she starts getting ready for supper, she maybe paints a wall in the kitchen that's been needing the paint, her kids come home from school, she feeds them, maybe she trims their hair, she does all of these things, he comes home, he eats, he watches TV, she does the laundry, the dishes, she makes his lunch for the next day. At the end of that week, she has no paycheck.
And all of her hours didn't count towards anything.
All of that never happened. It's completely invisible. It's erasable. It's non-enduring. It doesn't get registered on a pay stub. The way with the man, oh, this percent goes to his unemployment insurance, this percent goes to his Canada Pension Plan, this percent maybe goes to his disability insurance. All of these ways that his life is woven into the provincial and federal government's gaze. He exists. She doesn't exist as a worker. So I'm making this story really simple. 40 years later, he's got money in his Canada Pension Plan. He's got money in his bank account. He's got RRSPs.
He's got a retirement fund.
He exists. He's been a worker. He's going to have a party when he retires. He's got an identity. Maybe by now he's the head of the trucking company.
Yeah,
and
got some level of seniority.
Yeah, she is still just a housewife. I.e., that word, we're not supposed to use that word anymore. That's a slur, but because she's not married to the house, she's not a housewife, she's a home worker. As feminists, we've been saying that. She's a home worker. And she has gotten up at the same time every morning for 40 years as he's gotten up. She has worked all day, just as hard, if not harder, than he has worked. In fact, her work day has been longer because when he comes home from work, she makes his
Say
supper,
that
does
he
the
gets
dishes.
an off time.
Exactly. On the weekends, he has off time that he can do the barbecue or he could go play golf or whatever the things are. But she probably still has to make sure that the kids and him have breakfast, lunch, supper, that maybe she washes the car or mops the floor. Her
Changes
work day
everyone's sheets.
changes everyone's sheets, exactly. So her work day doesn't really disappear, it continues. The other thing, so women often have, the modern working class woman now, and I came to realize this as the years went on. I start to see this more and more vividly. What we often have now is women have a paid work day, so they may work a 40-hour week at McDonald's or something. The working class women of my world, okay? So they do their 40-hour week job.
Mm-hmm.
They may also have all of that childcare responsibility that we've just talked about. And then the third full-time job they have 3 full-time jobs. The third full-time job is all the work of status and emotional labor. So that's planning the birthday party, the weddings, that's planning their kids' graduation. That's making sure that their husband feels special on the weekend, and he really, really likes it when she makes those brownies with the special kind of chocolate chips in them, and so she is doing that specialness, all the emotional labor. Many times when I would look at the men in my life from that world, they wouldn't even know when their kids' birthdays were. They wouldn't have sat and done homework with their kids. They wouldn't have met all that sort of. Yeah. So you have your full-time paid job as a blue-collar woman. You have your full-time child care job and housekeeper job. And then that third job of all the emotional labor. And any of you have ever been in a family where abuse is going on, you really feel that emotional labor. Like, oh, hi, honey, do you want a glass of beer? Oh, hi, honey, can I do this for you? Hi, honey, do you want a blowjob? Will that cheer you up? Right? That women have all that emotional labor also going on, where we worry about, oh, my kid needs this today, or my grandma needs that today. All that care work and emotional work. So women often, from the crowd I came from, they have 3 full-time jobs at the same time. It's very stressful. But only the one job of waitressing at Tim Hortons
gets you money.
Gets you any identity in the public sphere. So this is what I went through. This is the consciousness raising. This has lots and lots of consequences for social work with victims of abuse. This has consequences for family counseling. Many times from that crowd, what you have is the man, let's say 10 years into the marriage, the husband says, I'm leaving you because you've gotten fat and ugly and you're cranky and tired all the time. Yeah. And he'll say, and mean it, and not have his consciousness raised. He'll say, the house is mine because I paid for it. The car is mine because I paid for it.
Exactly. And if you say, oh, well, I'm the one that maintains it, but he's the one who pays it, and that trumps anything that you've contributed.
He feels and believes that his money is his money because that paycheck came every Friday with his name at the top. Mm-hmm. And you did nothing. You were just a housewife. Because he doesn't fully understand how hard it is to do the laundry, do the dishes, mop the floor, change the cat boxes, water the plants, cut up the salad,
pay the hydro bill,
pay all the bills, the microeconomy of the household, all of that stuff. He doesn't even know what it feels like every Tuesday night to take the kids to the hockey game and to drive the other kid to this and go get the chocolate chips he needs for her to make the chocolate chip brownies on Saturday. All that work, he doesn't even see it or feel it or know it.
Or even consider it work.
Or consider it work,
it's just,
exactly.
A lot of the time it'll be delegated as just like her job or something.
Or she likes that kind of stuff. She likes folding laundry. She likes gossiping. She likes visiting everyone in the neighborhood.
That, or I've heard another one where, oh, well, if she made more than me, then I would be the housewife. Like, what? Right. So what we wish is that everybody's contribution to the well-being of the world is recognized formally and informally, right? And so this is class. This is a class issue. All of that
coming out of that world and realizing this is labor, all of this is labor, and I can make choices. That's one of the things that many working class or lumpen proletariat or proletariat folk, they don't even have a feeling they could make choices.
Yeah, you get the saying, like, my hands are tied, or that's just the way she goes.
That's just the way it is. It is what it is. They just kind of drift through life rather than making. Middle class kids are entitled to make choices, and they know they have choices. Well, you could go to this restaurant or that one. You could purchase this car or that car. You could go and live in this community or that community. You could go on holidays at Cancun or here, right? There's all these options. You could go to college or university.
That, and I mean, your choices are both, like, they're both benefits, and you don't have to sacrifice anything to choose one or the other.
Right.
Because a lot of the time, these people, like, sometimes they feel that they have a choice, but that their choice is between a rock and a hard place. Like, if they get this thing, then they're going to have to sacrifice this thing.
Right. I could work at Tim Hortons, or I could work at Country Style Donuts. Well, that's not really a big, rich choice. That's still crap versus crap.
Exactly. If I work at Tim Hortons, I can make more money, but then I won't be able to go to school. And if I go to school, then I won't be able to work.
Yeah. Middle class kids and upper class kids have all, and I'm making it, again, it's very simple. You know, I know the world isn't like
black and white.
Working class, middle class, upper class. I'm just using that kind of as a touchstone to talk about some things. And in classic Marxism, there's the idea of who owns the means of production and so on. Some of those standard ways of talking about things have become a little bit out there because, for example, I am a knowledge worker now. I'm a teacher. So who owns the means of production? Here I am with C19. I'm working at home, from my home. I'm paying people to help me out of my own wages. So am I an independent contractor now? How do we all fit into these different categories of who owns what?
Yeah.
Technology has made things different. And we also now have workers. You could theoretically be a worker in northern BC working for a company that is in Chicago or New York, right? Through technology and Skype and all these things. So, on the issue of class and how this has meaning to the life story of someone, here's 3 novels you could look at: Jude the Obscure, The Jungle, and Animal Farm. I believe these 3 novels, among a million others, but those 3 in my personal journey had meaning when I was in my teens, and I came across these and I had feelings about the characters in these stories. And then I started realizing that it's not that women don't work, it's we work in ways that don't get counted in a patriarchal capitalist economy. And then I started to look at the magnificence of women's work. And so, for example, The Household Economy, these are 2 books that have been in my life a long, long time. The Household Economy, Its Shape, Origins, and Future. Unlike the market economy, it is healthy, stable, growing, and the fulcrum of future change. In some ways, women are being asked now to go back into the home the way we did 150 years ago. We went in the home and we did sewing piecemeal, or we made food and then we sold it. More women are now being able to consider this kind of strange full circle back to working from the home. And how do we maintain some control and entitlements over that? Is it a great big fabulous freedom that you now can work from the home, teach from the home, do your typing and computing from the home, but pay for your own computer, pay for your own web time, pay for your own camera, pay for your own printer, pay for all of this stuff? And so the employer has basically downloaded onto you all the purchases of all the stuff to do the work you do, but they haven't increased your wages. They may in fact have decreased your wages and not given you benefits and so on. This is being called the gig economy. So in some ways it could, and you can't unionize the way you used to. If you worked in a factory, the employer couldn't move the factory,
So you could have 500 women working on making shirts in a factory, and the 500 women theoretically could unionize. But now, if there's 500 women doing web design and all these different things in 500 different separate homes where we've all paid for our own equipment, and now we are also doing childcare at home. So in some ways we're going back to Jude the Obscure, that were alone in our homes, working all day, all weekend, all night, caring for grandma, the kids, the yard, the garden, the cats, the dogs, and doing typing at 3 in the morning to keep things moving and to get some cash flow for our households.
So women are back in the house working, and we're like, is this a trap?
Well, we have to be
This
curious.
seems familiar.
We have to be curious. We have to be curious. And then here, this book here, Women at Work, 1850 to 1930. So talking about, I'll read you this little blurb from the back. Women's work has been fundamental to Canada's development, whether that work has involved serving the wealthy, struggling to maintain her own family, tending the ill, teaching, or producing profits for the owner of a garment factory through sweated labor. And the book continues talking about how her story, not history, her story has been erased. And we want to, unless you, the classic thing is, if you don't pay attention to your history and the mistakes, and your history and the mistakes, you're vulnerable to repeating them, and we want to not repeat them. So look at our mothers, our grandmothers, our great-grandmothers, and ponder. They were washing floors, baking, washing dishes, polishing the silver, pressing clothes, worrying about the garden, the yard. Maybe for many of them, as in Jude the Obscure, people, men and women of the poor, were doing harvesting, and they would move. Or think of the novel Grapes of Wrath, where the poorest of the poor would go harvest these fruits and vegetables, and then go to the next farm, and fruits and vegetables the next farm. And then when there were no harvests to be part of, they would literally starve almost to death because there were no options. At a time when there was no unemployment insurance, no disability insurance, and so on. But the new generation, the young women like Carlene here, and younger than her, I worry, are you going to end up that you have 5 part-time jobs or 5 contracts, 5 gigs that you're distributing your energy to, and at the end of the year, at the end of your life, your older years, will you have RRSPs? Will you have Canada Pension Plan? Will you have disability insurance? Will you have pharmacare? Because if nobody's been paying for it during the whole life cycle, you're not going to have it when you're old, right? So these are things we need to reflect upon it. And bringing this back full circle, this is class. This is the disenfranchised class. That's what I'll call us, disenfranchised class. And then you see, throughout the life cycle, we're vulnerable, just like we were 200, 300, 400 years ago, to turning to prostitution, marrying some guy called Igor just so that he'll take care of us. We're vulnerable to constant geographical relocations, where the farm workers during the Great Depression, they literally lived in their vehicle and just would go to some crappy old truck. A family of 5 would just keep moving with the potato picking or carrot picking or grapes or whatever it was, and they would live in tents with no water. Are we vulnerable to kind of turning to that again? When I think of Vancouver right now, and I hear them constantly talking about tent cities and homeless people, think of Vancouver East Side, think of all these people who we like to imagine that they all have, massive mental health problems, and that's what, and addictions, but many of them are just poor people. They're poor people. They're the same as you, me, anybody else, but they just haven't been lucky in the workforce. They haven't been protected in the workforce.
Yeah.
So,
and a lot of people don't realize exactly how easy it is to become homeless.
Exactly. So one of the other authors that I've come to love, I've always loved her from the day I met her. I've loved her ever since, Bell Hooks. I've got all of her books,
And I read them again and again and again. I've got them highlighted in 9 shades of pinks and yellows. So this is from Bell Hooks, and we all know Bell Hooks as an amazing American black feminist author. Some of her more famous books are Teaching to Transgress, Real to Real, Outlaw Culture, all about love. So I'll read you this back of her book about class. Where We Stand is a powerful new book by one of America's most admired critics and writers. For years we have turned to Bell Hooks, feminist, social thinker, memoirist, teacher, for her deeply felt ideas on women, race, culture, sexuality, and more recently on love and children. Now Bell Hooks talks about class, the elephant in the room, the unnamed subject we all know is central to our culture and its problems. Why is it that the face of poverty in America is a black face, even though most of the 36 million poor in America are white? How do fantasies of wealth's power keep people poor? How do black teens want, or what do black teens want, and how do they learn to want it? Are wealthy black Americans any more aware of class issues than wealthy whites? Why do we need so much money after all? Drawing on both her roots in Kentucky and her adventures with Manhattan co-op boards, Bell Hooks provides a successful women's reflection, personal, straightforward, and rigorously honest, on how our dilemmas of class and race are intertwined. So, see, she says class and race are intertwined. It gets really, really mushy and nebulous. A lot of the poor whites in America and Canada and elsewhere, I believe, are angry and bitter. They have been taught through their whiteness to feel entitled. I felt, my grandpa worked in the mines. My grandpa had a good job. He worked all his life in the same mine. He made great money. He had benefits. He worked in the factory. He worked doing these different kinds of jobs. Forestry, fishing, blue-collar work. But many of those industries have disappeared or dried up because they've moved the factories to Mexico or China or Bangladesh.
Where the labor is cheaper.
Where the labor is cheaper. So what's happened is a lot of white folk are rageful and bitter, and they vote for someone like Trump. They turn conservative. They turn to religion thinking, well, God will provide if I pray harder.
That, or they just want something that's not what they currently have. Like, they know that they're currently unhappy, so they think that just by default anything must be better than what they're currently dealing with.
And they're looking for someone to blame.
Yeah.
And so that white working poor people, blue-collar people, white lumpen proletariat,
we love scapegoats.
We're tempted to find scapegoats. That's how the human psyche is constructed. But also the middle class and the upper class are looking for someone to blame, and they can divide and conquer us as a class. So what you can have is the white men who used to work in a factory. If you're like Mark Lepine, the white men who wanted to be engineers and didn't get a chance, you can blame the feminists and go to the university and shoot 14 of them. So white working poor men can blame women, their own women, white women, let's see, or they can blame black women, or they can blame black men. They're looking for somebody to blame. And what we can be doing as social workers with victim abuse, family counselors, social justice activists, can say, whoa. Let's look up. Let's see, okay, the factory shut down and you lost your job, or the mine moved from Sudbury, where I used to live. They moved the mines to Peru or wherever they moved them, Guatemala, where the workers are cheap, where there was no protection of the environment, where there were no pensions, no disability rights, all that stuff. So the company and global capital is who's causing your pain. Look up. That's who's causing the pain. It's not the other 20-year-old girl who wanted to go to university, and it's not your neighbor who's indigenous or black or in other ways marginalized and oppressed. Do not let us blame each other and be mean and bitter and oppressive to each other. Let's look up and ponder, what if we force the corporations to keep their money in Canada and develop our own workers, right?
or developed our own resources as a state-owned company, right? There's other ways to talk about this. So what I wanted to do today is talk about how do we raise the consciousness of white folk so that they understand what's happening, and instead of
Victim
blaming, and instead of blaming ourselves, let's ponder how we can be better and different. So that brings me to 100 years of social work. So this is an amazing book that talks about the profession of social work. 100 Years of Social Work chronicles the early history of the secularization and professionalization of social work and examines social workers' roles during both world wars, the Depression, and the era of post-war reconstruction. It includes sections on civil defense, the Cold War, unionization, social work education, regulation of the profession, and other key developments in the 20th century. So as my own consciousness kind of rose about class issues, when I go to a Take Back the Night, International Women's Day, December 6th ceremonies, when I go to strikes, when I go to actions about poverty, I'm always curious how many social workers are here. Or are they in their office focusing on their 9-to-5 tasks of filling in forms? Are they out there seeing themselves as advocates for change, or are they being co-opted? And I would suggest to you that a good portion of the social work profession becomes co-opted. And I would wish you to watch for that danger during your life cycle as a professional, and don't do it. Don't do it. Try to look all the time at who benefits, how can we resist, and to know sometimes we cannot resist successfully because we do still live in a capitalist patriarchal world. Invite each other to vote NDP, invite each other to vote Green, invite each other to step up and encourage unions. If nothing else, with every client that's in front of you, actively tell the truth about class. In this room right now, as I look around this room, we have, let's say, seating for 6 people. Let's say, right? If there were 10 people who wanted to sit down and 4 of them couldn't find a chair, would I be telling the truth to say, well, what's wrong with you? You didn't bring your own chair. What's wrong with you that you can't find a chair to sit down on? Let's work on your resume and your presentation skills in regards to chair finding. Right?
And then get mad when they say, well, then perhaps we just need to sit on someone else's lap.
We need to build more chairs. We need to take turns with the chairs. It's not to blame the victims. So if you live in a town where the industry has crashed and there's 80% unemployment, if you just sit around and keep helping people update their resume, you're colluding in bullshit. You're colluding in victim blaming, right? We can at least tell the truth and say, I'm really sorry that the company exploited workers and natural resources in this community for 85 years, and now they've taken their profits and they've moved them to Guatemala or to Mexico or to China or wherever they've moved them for whatever the reasons. I'm really sorry that happened to you. You're not to blame. It's not your fault. And no matter what your resume looks like, unfortunately right now in this community, there's very limited work opportunities. So either we can help you move to another community, or we can look at how can we use the resources that are available if you choose to stay in this community. Canada is a long, long, long story of boom, bust, boom, bust, boom, bust. Mm-hmm. So if you're going to stay in this community, maybe we need to look almost 200, 300, 500 years back. How can we get you picking berries, using the land, fishing, get a freezer? If we look at some indigenous communities, here's another structural piece I want to put out there for this conversation on class. Sometimes the settler gaze will say, oh, look at that community. There's 5,000 people there, and 95% of them are unemployed. It's so sad. I don't know. Maybe 90% of them every single day, like the Invisible Women's community we were talking about, the women work community. Maybe 90% of them every single day are getting up and picking berries, going fishing, going hunting. They are harvesting natural resources. They are picking dandelions to make salad. They are all doing babysitting and elder care. They're building houses, fixing houses, shoveling snow. Every single person is actually doing stuff. Yeah. But they're not engaging with the Eurocentric economy. Let us remember that. Right? So don't go into one of those communities and say to yourself, oh, 90% of the people here, every single day, they just wake up and sit there all day just staring at the wall, and then they go back to sleep.
Unemployed doesn't mean that they're not working, basically.
Exactly. Let us be really cautious of what are we talking about here. Are we talking about how they pay taxes into the provincial and federal economies, or are we talking about working? Right? So ponder that, reflect on that, and maybe explore with people how can we do it differently. We want to have our ideal is every single person that we ever engage with in our social work role as victims of abuse or working with families, that every single person have dignity, good information, and we inform them about the patterns of abuse. Sometimes this is abandonment by the provincial and federal government. Sometimes this is abandonment by corporations. They just trick us, pollute our water, kill off our fish, steal our land, ours saying Canadian, but more so even Indigenous. And what are we going to do about that? What can we do differently? So, I come from a town, Sudbury, Big Nickel, where there were two big companies for a very long time, and they harvested the resources. They made lots and lots of money for 100 years. At some points in our history and her story, we were able to unionize and resist, but then in other moments we weren't able to resist effectively, and they moved their capital. So I know what it's like to live in a community where 20,000 people, 20,000 men, had good jobs with good benefits and security, and then maybe 10 years later, 20 years later, you have a community where only 2,000 workers are making money from the mine, and they've taken their profits elsewhere. So how do we force them to keep their profits in the communities where they take the resources and keep recycling it back? Mm-hmm. And also, how much profit is enough profit? If they come in and they take your resources, is it fair to say, 10% of every dollar you make off our nickel or our fishing or our gold or our diamonds in northern communities now, you for every dollar you make, you're going to put $10 cents into a pot of gold for when the natural resources are gone. Yep. And that'll be there to help the people who remain rebuild and diversify that economy. Mm-hmm. Without having to, if you come in and you take the resources, let's say before that there was hunting to do and fishing to do and good gardens and harvesting and so on, but now through your mine you've managed to pollute and destroy the water, the air, the land, everything.
Yeah. And now you've taken away the natural resources, the food sources, the
diversified economy.
Yeah.
You've made it a mono economy, and then you leave.
And then you took away the value of that one thing that they can produce.
Right.
Thank you, capitalism.
Right. So this is where we can be very, I think, empowering to our clients to help them realize it's not your fault. There's bigger things going on here. There's bigger patterns than you. And within that terrain, what can we still do that is possible, empowering, effective? So in my case, I came from that community where it went bust in lots of ways. So at age 40, I was fortunate and empowered that I had a PhD, that I had professional experiences, and that I was able to relocate across the nation to another job. And that relocation was paid for by my employer. So let's say if an economy is going to go bust in a geographical region, if you had that 10% you'd been claiming, or 20 or whatever, over a 30-year, 40-year period, you could take that and say, we're going to take that money to help every employee here get a master's degree in any topic they want. Or we're going to help them relocate to other communities.
We're going to help them get some employability skills.
Ongoingly.
Yeah.
Right?
Invest in them and their future.
Exactly. So, the issue of class is still, I believe, perhaps the number one issue in a social work world. Because the clients that you have are the poor clients. The people who are middle class and rich, they may not come to us in our publicly funded agencies. They may go see when they feel sad because they wanted to be artists and they can't find a good tutor. They go to a private therapist. They pay $160 an hour. The clients that we see in social work through a family counseling agency or a rape crisis center or a women's shelter or through the paroles board or so on, where we end up as social workers, we end up with the lumpen proletariat or the working poor, because that's who ends up being in our offices. So as someone who's gone through all of that, I just happen to be very lucky. I can tell you one strange fluke and quirk of my existence. My grandparents, my maternal grandparents, they loved me a lot, and they believed in education, and they saw that as something in me worth cherishing and cultivating. And earliest years of my life, they bought me all the Dr. Seuss books, they bought me all the Nancy Drew books, they bought me any book, encyclopedia, anything I wanted. They bought me puzzles, they bought me crayons and markers, they bought me things like that and celebrated me that I cared about those things. And it made me feel rich and informed and entitled to get something from the world. Had I not had that, I believe I would have died of suicide long ago. And the world wouldn't have even ever noticed me. I feel very privileged to just through that strange quirk that I love to read. And reading in our Western world, the more you love to read, the more you can do well in school. And I got an education. And I dream that and wish that for everybody, that they get an education, not just an education that will give them tools in the work world, but will give them tools and critical thinking skills like Bell Hooks wishes us to have. So, thank you for coming for this discussion today about class. It's a big one. It's one of those issues that I'm sure millions of books have been written and a million more will be written. But for the purposes of today and social work with victims of abuse and family counseling, there's a very foundational structure there we need to be alert to and invite our clients to be more alert to and help them see their own possibilities within that tampered with terrain. Thank you, Carlene. Thank you, Stephen.